Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today we're going to be ranking all 8 United Football League head coaches after the 2024 United Football League season. This is something I haven't done the past couple years, but I wanted to start doing, and that's ranking them after the season. We're going to compare where I had them heading into the season, so see which coaches moved up in the rankings, which moved down in the rankings, and overall give my thoughts on all that. Naturally, the head coaches are at this moment technically free agents because of the fact they were seasonal employees, so it's mainly up to the league and the coaches if they want to come back. So this is also going to be me giving my thoughts on whether or not the league should, retain these guys or not. So without further ado, if you end up enjoying this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're not already. We're doing a giveaway to 1,000 subscribers. And number 8, to the shock of 0 people, I would assume, is Curtis Johnson. I mean, I could literally just say 8 Curtis Johnson and move on to 7, and nobody would even bat an eye. I mean, again, does this shock anybody? Curtis Johnson completely mismanaged his team. He had multiple coaching blunders, but of course the biggest blunder was the quote-unquote best offense in the league when describing the Houston Roughnecks offense. Yeah, when he said that, they had yet to score more than 20 points in a single game. In fact, the Roughnecks' scoring was so bad, they finished with less than 160 points scored across a 10-game season. That's under 16 points a game. That's horrific. I mean, for how bad Memphis was on, their yardage and all that, even they at least put up 188 points. The Roughnecks couldn't be bothered to score pretty much in any game but really the one against Birmingham, and even then it just wasn't enough. They're the only team to lose to Memphis, and they pulled that off twice. They finished with one win, that was against Luis Perez when he was at his worst. So their one win was, one that everybody knows that if they were to replay that game, they would lose that one. I mean, just terrible. Look, the defensive line, I'll talk about it in a video in the future, but the defensive line was an utter failure for how talented it was, and some of that blame has to go to CJ. But of course, the biggest one is the QB room. I remember, as I've talked about it before, and I'll talk about it in the future, nobody had any faith in Garantano. Everybody said he was going to be bad. He still put him out as the starter, and Garantano was bad. In fact, you can make a case that of anybody who played more than 2 games in the league this year, that Sinet and Garantano are arguably the 2 worst quarterbacks that played this entire season. Guess what? Nolan Henderson, who was the best QB by far, he didn't get really any time till the end of the season. So your best QB you had as your 3rd string guy. So again, another Curtis Johnson fail. Mark Thompson. When Mark Thompson came back and was actually healthy, they basically used him right in about 3 games, if that many. The fact is that CJ just got outmatched in basically every game this year. Even in a game against another head coach we'll get to in a second that actively tried to throw the game, Curtis still couldn't get his team the W. Again, this shouldn't shock anybody. Nobody should be upset at number 8 being Curtis Johnson. Do I think he should be brought back? No. I think that the Roughnecks, they got a new GM. I think that they also need to get a new head coach. Look, the fact is that Curtis Johnson had a QB in Kenji Bahar who wasn't incredible but was good enough to get you a few wins, and is a QB that is probably good enough to get you to the playoffs if he's on the right team. You got rid of him to get 2 guys who were undoubtedly worse than Kenji Bahar. You brought back Bahar just to let him go again once Garantano was healthy, despite you already knowing Garantano is not that good a quarterback. Things like that are just inexcusable. It becomes more and more apparent that Mark Thompson pulled off one of the carry jobs of the century in 2023. I would not bring back Curtis Johnson. Now, before we get to number 7, I will say that numbers 7 and 6, you can easily flip-flop them. It was very tough for me to decide which one because one of them I felt was more failing at managing talent and one of them was more failing at actual head coaching jobs. You can easily flip them, but for me, I'm putting number 7 as Reggie Barlow. Reggie Barlow falls a lot. CJ stays the same as 8 from my preseason rankings. Reggie Barlow falls 5 spots. And the biggest reason is, like many, a lot of us realized that in 2023 he was heavily carried by his talent. Granted, the same thing is true about Teamu, but the farther and farther we go away from 2023, the more we realize that Abram Smith and Lucky Jackson really did help carry the defenders to being such a good team in 2023. Look, the defenders on paper got more talented on defense, yet their defense wasn't all that great. Then you look at their offense, yes, they lost a lot of receivers, but they still had a couple guys come up and play. Yes, they lost Abram Smith, but the fact is we've seen other teams lose. For instance, the Breakers from 22 to 23. They lost a lot of good talent and ended up being better. What about the defenders? No. Reggie Barlow's coaching was horrific. That game against Houston, terrible uses of timeouts, challenges, and they still somehow lucked into that win. And a lot of those games, especially the Birmingham one, that's on coaching. The Birmingham game was just horrific. Birmingham fumbled twice in the red zone. DC basically had a shot to end the game late in the fourth quarter and decided to just kick a field goal, even though everybody was watching knew Birmingham was going to go down the field and kick a game-winning field goal. They blew the second half of the season. They lost to a backup QB against St. Louis. And I mean, they even lost an Arlington game where Arlington actively tried to throw as well. I mean, Arlington, Luis Perez had a terrible first half. There was that insanely stupid safety Manigo got, and in the end, Arlington still beat him in Week 10. Look, Reggie Barlow definitely deserves to fall this far. Look, the fact is that I think that he is the second worst head coach in the league. I think the fact is that his talent carried him a lot more than people expected it to. Yes, talent always helps a head coach, but we did not think it was this bad. I remember even worse than CJ to most people, the timeout usage, the challenge usage was probably worse from Reggie than even CJ. It was like every week there was something stupid he was challenging or using timeouts at bad places. I mean, I think Reggie has to be 7. I get the argument that you could put him at 6, because like I said, I think 6 and 7 are very easily swappable, because I think the issues are a bit different, which I'll get to actually when I get to the 6th spot, which you all probably know who is number 6. But the fact is, the Reggie, do you bring him back? I would honestly think that if you do, I'm not super against it. I mean, maybe he's one of those guys that just has to have talent to be good, even though you don't want that as a head coach. The fact is, he still did have a 9-1 team one year. He still did make it to a championship game in 2023. But at the same token, if he were to be gone, I don't think anyone would really be that upset. But I don't think it's like CJ where it's like, yeah, he has to go. I think that it's okay if Reggie stays, but if you could get somebody better, like if you could get Ray Horton back, or you can get Jaron Horton to be the head coach, yeah, those are better guys than him. I mean, hell, maybe you somehow get somebody else to come back or something. Who knows? But I put him at 7. Number 6 is John DeFilippo. DeFilippo falls a couple of spots. He was like 4 in my preseason rankings, mainly due to what he was able to do with the 22 versus 23 breakers, where the 22 breakers, had a lot of players that did not return in 2023, like Kyle Sloter and the running back and all that, and they were still able to be this elite offense. But this past year was just talent mismanagement. The absolutely just mind-numbing decision to not retool the offensive line during the season led to their rushing game being horrific. Their rushing game, they had one guy with over 100 rushing yards in the season. That's it. Darius Victor at 389. That was it. Nobody else had 100. Cookus, Swen, Williams all had over 70, and then that was it. They had 4 guys with over 70, 1 with over 100. Oh my god. And again, we'll talk about the stats again. I didn't even mention the turnover differential, which they were awful at as well. But they finished as the worst team in yards allowed and yards a game offensively. They allowed the most points. Their QB situation was also terrible. Again, talent mismanagement. They were swapping QBs like mid-game. It wasn't game to game. It was just like half to half. One half it's Cookus, next half it's T-Will. Then it's T-Will again, back to Cookus. And they did that way too much this season, so no QB was able to get a true, stronghold on that spot. Granted, it's not like they could do that much when the offensive line was doing nothing. Now the defense, I don't put a lot of blame on DeFilippo. I put some of it on, but the fact is the defense, as we talked about, played in over its head back in 2023. Yes, there were some players that were not on this 2024 team. I do not think they would have made that much a difference. I think they would have helped, but they wouldn't have made it from, the worst into a best unit. But DeFilippo definitely deserves a lot of blame for the talent mismanagement in the offense. The offense is where he was praised a lot in 2023, and this year, not so much. So I put him at 6. I think he deserves to fall a couple spots. I think there was a lot of things he could have done better. I do think you bring him back next year, though. I think that as long as you, have them understand they need to fix things, you can. But I think he's like Reggie. If you don't bring him back, I get it. And there are guys you can get to be a head coach instead, which people would be okay with. But I think that it wouldn't be the best decision to get rid of, 3 coaches in 1 year. But I feel like, just like Reggie, I think that there are guys you could very well justify to be the head coach over DeFilippo. But DeFilippo's a great story with, the back issue or something like that happened, in 2023. And a lot of stuff. He's a guy who's really fired up as a coach, and a lot of people love him as the mic'd up coach and all that. So you wouldn't want to get rid of him. So I would bring him back, but maybe get a different GM. Coming in at number 5 is going to be Bob Stoops. Again, one that shouldn't really shock anybody. Look, I had Stoops as the third best coach heading into the season, and he drops a couple spots. And the main reason is the reason that I had certain guys in the middle of the pack heading into the season, and that's not being able to close out close games. I've always said it, close games, a lot of that has to be on coaching, and Stoops definitely deserves to take a lot of blame for it. The fact that he was able to lose multiple last second games is kind of impressive in a negative way. Like, yes, the week 1 game against Birmingham, we all know it was that, first half TD that basically ended the game. Birmingham just went off, in the second half it was over. But the last second loss to St. Louis, the choke against DC, the loss against Houston of all teams, then you have the last second loss to Michigan. Then yes, they finished 3-1 the final 4 games of the season. But there were a lot of games they easily could have won, and this team could have very easily been a playoff team. But they lost a lot of close games, and a lot of the blame has to fall on Stoops' shoulders. Now, there are some good things. The turnover differential was tied for the best in the league. The passing yards per game was the best in the league. The third down percentage was the best in the league. So there's a lot of things that show why he deserves to be the highest ranking non-playoff coach in this ranking. Again, I think you do bring him back. Will he come back? No, he's one of the two guys, or maybe. He's one of the two coaches that very well might not come back because of their own accord. Him and Wade basically are both in that kind of similar boat of it's about money, time when the league's playing and all that to see whether or not they return. You would want Stoops to come back, but there is a good chance that he might not come back. Who knows? You'd hope he does because, again, the second half of the season, mainly the last 4 games, the Renegades did prove they still have that championship gene in them. It's just that the first half of the season, or really the first 6 games of the season, they lost a lot of close games. A lot of that has to fall on Stoops, and that's why he does fall out of the top 4, and he falls to number 5. Coming at number 4 is going to be Anthony Becht. Becht moves up 3 spots. I think that he was able to prove a lot of people, including myself, a little bit wrong in a sense that I thought he was, just one of those guys that was, a former player, rowdy guy. But he definitely was better than I expected, but not as good as some Battlehawks fans would make you think he is. Look, there's 2 major red flags that keep him out of the top 3. Number 1, his offensive coordinator. Bruce Gradkowski, you can very well make the case, was the single worst coordinator in the entire league. Yes, I'm even talking about, the Roughnecks OC. The fact is that the amount of offensive talent that was mismanaged, misused, failed to be used in St. Louis is unbelievable. I've talked to multiple Battlehawks fans, and they all say the same thing. What happened to our offense? You had so many great receivers, yet you barely used them. You basically used one receiver every 2 weeks, and then you basically did nothing with him. Marcel Aitman, remember how good he was the first couple weeks of the season? Well, you basically didn't hear him since. Hakeem Butler had those 2 really good games, near the end of the season. Then he had a really solid XFL championship game where he still dropped a couple passes, but overall was the best receiver on the field that day. Ja'Cour Pearson had a game. Darius Shepard had a game. That was it. Screen pass after screen pass. Just terrible use. Had great running backs, and then at the end of the year was barely using them. It was just... a lot of that blame falls on Becht. Not taking over the offense, not changing the OC, not firing Gradkowski, doing something. If Gradkowski's back next year, there's a good shot Becht might actually fall to 5 if Stoops returns as well, because that would be a horrid coaching decision. The other reason is, of course, because he kind of threw in the towel in the XFL championship game. The announcers talked about it, everybody on X talked about it, I've talked about it. He basically threw in the towel at the end of the game. He went for a TD when he really shouldn't have. He got into field goal range with a good minute left. You kick a field goal there, you go for the 4th and 12. I get the argument. If you score a TD and you get the 4th and 12, you're less than 10 yards away from field goal range. But here's the issue. You have to score to get the 4th and 12. And what he did was he dug a hole and kept digging instead of just getting out. So it got too deep at about the 25, 20-ish second mark, and it's you kind of have to go for a TD now. And then guess what? Ran out of time, missed the 4th down play, didn't even score at all. What they should have done is at about the 55-second mark, when they were at the 36, they should have kicked the long field goal, then gone for the 4th and 12. Instead, they kept doing play after play after play, and it backfired on them. That was terrible coaching. That whole final drive was basically misdone once it hit that minute mark. and they lost. Now, you have to give him credit. He won the division. It was barely, but he won the division. He made the playoffs. Was it a similar team to last year in a sense that they weren't able to really beat the truly elite teams? Kinda. I mean, remember the 23 Battlehawks? Couldn't beat DC. It only went 1-1 against the Dragons. The 24 Battlehawks couldn't beat Michigan, couldn't beat Birmingham, and lost to San Antonio because they did lose to the Renegades when they were really good, but that was also with a backup QB. You can make any case you want. 3 of their 4 losses were to basically the 3 best teams in the league. But coming to number 4, he moves up a few spots for me, gains a lot of respect from me, but no, he is not a top 3 head coach, and if a Battlehawk fan tries to convince you he is, I would just say Bruce Gradkowski, and that would be my argument. Because again, Gradkowski, terrible OC, Beck needs to get rid of him, like now, if not already, or just not bring him back. We'll see. Have him at 4. He moves up a couple spots for me. I think he deserves it, but he doesn't deserve to move higher. Number 3 is going to be Wade Phillips. I mean, the easiest way to show why he deserves to move up is he took a team that went 3-7 and went 7-3. I mean, it's that simple. Look, there's a lot of things that he did do really well. The defense was incredible. 147 points allowed was easily the best in the league. Birmingham was a pretty distant second, near 20 points behind them, and then third place, the Battlehawks, were like another 10 points behind them. So they almost had a 30. They were just 3 points away from a 30-point difference. 27 points allowed is a crazy difference from first to third. Their yards per game allowed wasn't incredible. It was, right in line with Battlehawks and Stallions, but it was still the best. The one thing that puts Wade at 3 and not 2 or 1, yes, partially because they got shot out in the championship game, but not really. The main reason is the quarterback mismanagement, which does have to do with the championship game. Look, I've said it before, I'll say it again. After the Houston game, they should have ran with Hogan again. I don't know why they went back to Dormaday. Dormaday is not that guy, and the fact that they brought back Dormaday meant that you kind of were stuck with him in the end. Because I genuinely feel like if you had put in Hogan that next game, you would have been able to see if he was truly better than Dormaday or put an even bigger fire under Dormaday. And I think that was just mismanagement. Now, in hindsight, didn't really matter. But at the time, it made no sense. And even now, while hindsight's 20/20, and a lot of people say it didn't matter, I still think it would have been better if they had put in Hogan. And another thing is, of course, the championship game. Not putting in Dormaday or Hogan until it was way too late made no sense. Once Garbers did the first slide where he was short, you should have been like, yeah, let's not play Chase Garbers. Instead, you kept him in way too long, and that was basically the main reason why you lost the championship game. The Stallions only put up 25 points, okay? If you can't put up 25 points in a championship game, do you really deserve to win? So the fact is with the Brahmas, they couldn't even put up a point. Yes, they were in field goal range. They couldn't put up any points on the board. They should have changed the QB. So mainly it's the QB mismanagement that keeps him at 3, and I think the fact that the coaching job done at number 2 was better when you count for injuries. Yes, there were some injuries to, Wade's team, of course. You had some later in the season, early in the season, later with Cody Latimer, early with Alex Millette, and a few other guys. I think Wade definitely deserves to be number 3. He's 2 spots higher than what I had him heading into the season. I think he definitely deserves to be moved up. The only reason, again, like I said, is I think the QB position was pretty much mismanaged a lot. It wasn't even really due to injuries, I would say, because, again, the Kevin Hogan situation, Hogan won you that Houston game, and he looked like the better QB. And Dormaday, for most of the season, really wasn't that great. Was he an absolute dumpster fire? God, no, but he wasn't that good. And you couldn't put in Hogan for a game? I don't know. And then the championship game, QB position again, mismanaged. I just feel like this deserves to be the number 3 spot. Wade definitely deserves to move up. He did an incredible job. I'm putting him at 3. Number 2 is going to be Mike Nolan. The Coach of the Year winner, only at 2. Again, he was able to make a team that was 4-6 and lost in the playoffs to 7-3 and lost in the playoffs. But the point is that he was able to do it despite a lot of adversity. Look, I know some people will say, well, X team played this many quarterbacks and all that. The Panthers were forced to play a lot of QBs, okay? The Brahmas, they played 3, quote-unquote, but, one of them came in for like half a game, and that's all they played. Nolan was basically forced to play 4 different QBs because he didn't know what he had in Lurick or Perkins, so he played them both multiple games. Then, of course, Danny Etling and E.J. Perry both had injuries. And then, of course, the biggest issue is that Perkins got hurt at the worst possible time, to where Etling was kind of forced to play the entire playoff game. Yes, they could have gone to Lewerke, but Lewerke was clearly the worst QB over really all 4 of them. and it's not like Perry was actually really healthy at that point. They lost their defensive leader, Frank Gidna, basically middle of the season. There's a lot of questions. You can do a lot of ifs with this Panthers team. Unlike a lot of other teams like the Battlehawks, where the if AJ McCarron was healthy, I don't really think changed anything. If the Panthers are healthy, I do think they beat the Stallions. If they had Bryce Perkins available as the backup to come in, if they had Frank Gidden on defense, I think a lot of people agree the Panthers probably would have pulled off the upset. Whereas if AJ was healthy, nothing really would have changed in the XFL Conference Championship game. The Brahmas still would have won that game. So again, Nolan moves up because of the injuries. And those aren't the only ones. Marcus Sims got hurt late in the season, missed a couple games, was playing through injury. And of course, the fact that Breland Speaks had a much better season this second year, some of that has to go to Nolan, who had a great defense. And for a lot of the season, the Michigan Panthers defense was elite. It finishes being, a top 4 unit. And I think that overall, he deserves the second spot. I think the coaching job he did was better than Wade, as I've said before. I think that having to play 4 different QBs, yet still having a consistently decent, after the first couple weeks of the season, a consistently good offense. Losing Wes Hill's really hurt. That's another major player that got hurt for them. I do think he deserves the 2 spot, but despite being Coach of the Year, I don't think he should be number 1. Naturally, I haven't said it, but yes, of course, basically everybody in the top 4 I think the league should bring back if they can. And number 1 is Skip Holtz. Who else was it going to be? Skip Holtz has now won 3 consecutive championships. He was a Coach of the Year winner once. And it's just, you can't argue this. You just can't. Again, he won the championship game 3 different times with 3 different QBs starting in that game. He has 4 losses across 3 seasons, including the postseason, whereas every team this year had 4 losses, including the postseason. It's just, it's not even arguable. Skip is just so far ahead of the competition in the best head coach ranking, it's incredible. You can legitimately see him finish next year 6-4 and losing in the first round of the playoffs, and you could still probably make a case for him to be the number 1 coach in the league. That's how good a job he's done. Of course he's number 1. There's no arguing against it. Skip Holtz is the best coach in the league. No question. Number 1, Skip Holtz. So that'll do it. This has been ZombFox. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as I upload any videos. If you want to become a channel member to support the channel, it's only 99 cents a month at the lowest tier. You get an exclusive video every month as well as many other benefits. We did get our second channel member, so if you become a channel member, we now have 5 team exclusive or channel member exclusive emojis instead of 4. So if you want to use those, also become a channel member for that. And as always, guys, have a great night.